Hi everyone, welcome to the second video on testing your art supplies. So in the first video, we looked at pen and paper. In this video, we are going to look at paper, more specifically watercolor paper, because my YouTube channel features watercolor sketching and the paper that I use is usually watercolor paper. By the way, I have another video on watercolor paper. It's called How to Choose Good Watercolor Paper. So you can see today's video as sort of a complement to that video as well. If you want to watch that earlier video and the watercolor paper video, the links are in the video description below. Over the years, I have used many sketchbooks with different types of paper, and some of them have given me rather unexpected results and some nasty surprises. So I'm going to go through some of the surprises, the unexpected results that I experienced. So we'll start with this, the Cardi Papers Watercolor Sketchbook. This is actually one of my favorite sketchbooks because it's made with 100% cotton paper. It's able to handle wet on wet techniques really well. This is handmade paper, so there is some imperfections on the paper. Sometimes the paper fiber collects in one clump. But the more, unsettling thing is sometimes the paper sizing is not perfect. So for example, with this particular sketch, when I talk about sizing, I'm not referring to the physical dimension of the paper. I'm talking about the coating that is applied on the surface of the paper to allow the paper to handle water. So if the paper doesn't have any sizing and you apply water on it, the water is going to soak through the paper, and that sort of paper is not suitable for watercolor use. But sometimes the sizing can go wrong. For example, with this particular page. So when I apply watercolor on it, you can see a lot of the paper white actually shows through. Now with good paper, you should be able to see the watercolor on the paper and not much of the paper white. So here, for example, it looks like the color it's very washed out. Let me show you another example where the paper sizing is working. So here you can see the color, it's more intense. It looks right here, but here, can you see the difference between this, for example, this part here and this part here? Here's another example. So I have used the same color on the left and right pages. On the left side, the sizing is working well. On the right side, there is something wrong with the sizing. So even though I use the same color, they look a bit different. You can see there is so much more texture here, and it doesn't look that nice because this texture makes the color look a bit washed out. This is a customized sketchbook that I have made with Arches hot press paper. When I was painting the color swatches, I could feel that the sizing was sort of off. When I added water, when I added the paint, the paper feels like it's soaking in the water, and the colors, they don't move much. Now with good watercolor paper, the water should remain on the surface for a while. I mean, the paper will still soak in some water, but it should remain on the surface for a while and let the colors blend. But for this paper, where the sizing has gone wrong, it soaks in the water very quickly and it stops the colors from moving around that much. And because of the sizing, the colors, they appear to be very washed out. So this paper is damaged. So when I painted this with ultramarine and burnt sienna, it's supposed to look very dark, very intense, but here, this whole sketch, it looks very washed out. As a result, I will not be using this sketchbook anymore for watercolor. I'll just be using pen and ink. Arches is a reputable paper maker, but sometimes things can still go wrong. I think the problem with this paper in this sketchbook is I kept it too long, so the paper sizing could have expired. So that's one nasty surprise that I have when I used the paper in this sketchbook. I was expecting really good performance, but the results look like something else. Alright, the next sketchbook I want to show you, the second surprise that I want to show you is this sketchbook. This is the Strathmore 500 series mixed media journal. it has 100% cotton paper, but the paper is not sized for watercolor use. So as a result, when I use watercolor on it, once again, it feels like the paper is absorbing the paint and the water very quickly. And once the paper absorbs the paint and the water, the watercolor, the colors, they don't move much. So it's very difficult to achieve wet on wet techniques. It's very difficult to blend colors, to let the colors blend into each other, to fit the colors into the white of the paper. So, I mean, it's not that good for watercolor unless you are looking for a very illustrative style, a very clean illustrative style. This paper is great for pen and ink, but with watercolor there are going to be limitations. So you can see here the colors, they don't blend softly. You can still see the horizontal strokes very obviously. Pen and ink, brush pen, it's great. Watercolor, you're going to get a lot of hard edges. So we have cotton paper on the left side and cotton paper on the right side. This is Archer's cold press paper. Now with properly sized watercolor paper, you're going to be able to blend the colors softly into one another. You're going to be able to get diffused, very soft edges like this. So whether or not there is sizing, proper sizing on the paper, it matters a lot with watercolor usage. Some watercolor paper is just not good and it can be difficult to pinpoint what is wrong. So this is the Be Creative Watercolor Journal, and this is actually the one that inspired me to make these 2 videos on testing your art supplies. I brought this journal overseas for a sketching trip and it wasn't able to handle water well, so I had a terrible time using watercolor with it. The colors, I mean the color itself looks good, but the watercolor techniques like wet on wet, wet on dry, it feels really off when I am painting on this paper. The colors feel a bit washed out, and also when I apply water and paint on it, the paper again soaks the color in and doesn't move the color that much. And also the vibrancy of the colors is affected. So for example, these 2 papers. This is the Stillman Burn sketchbook with cellulose paper. This is also cellulose paper, non-100% cotton paper. And straight away I can tell that the colors on this side here, it's more intense, it's more vibrant. It is important to test your paper before you use it to create actual artwork. For example, in this case, if you are going to be bringing a sketchbook overseas, a sketchbook with a new type of paper that you haven't used before, be sure to test it because you don't want any nasty surprises. Or at least bring some backup papers that you have been using for the longest time. Paper that you know will behave predictably. So how can you test paper for watercolor use? Well, sometimes the paper maker may sell sample packs like this. So this set here, this is the Strathmore assorted pack. I'm going to paint watercolor on these different types of paper and let you see the different results, and we'll see which are the papers that are good for watercolor use and which are not. And in this pack we have Fabriano paper. This is an illustration board. This is probably for acrylic. This is canvas. Now these 4 are obviously not suitable for watercolor, so I'm not going to be using them. I'll be using this instead, and this too looks like watercolor paper, but these 6 pieces here, I have no idea what they are, which is great because I wanted to test and see if they are good for use with watercolor. To test for good watercolor paper is very easy. You just wet the paper first and then paint on it to see how the paint reacts. And see if the paint will diffuse. So I'm going to try and paint a flat wash and see if the color can sort of fade into the white of the paper. Alright. Can you see those vertical lines coming down? So I'm going to leave this to dry for a while before we take a look at it again. For this second sheet of paper, I'm going to do the same thing. This time I'm going to paint a flat wash over this, and I'm going to paint some horizontal lines. I'm going to basically charge in some colors and see if the colors can diffuse. So this is ultramarine, and I'm going to paint some yellow in. So once again, I'm going to put this at the side there and use another paper. When you're using single sheets of paper like this, make sure you are painting on the correct side. Some paper is only textured on one side, and that side is the one for painting. If you paint on the other side, the performance is going to be, the paint is going to behave a bit differently. So once again, I want to see if this ultramarine, if this is able to blend into the white of the paper. This should be the same paper that I used earlier, and with this paper I'm going to paint that flat wash again and then charging some colors. Can you see the texture on this paper? I'm not sure what this paper is. It looks like it's watercolor paper, but there is another paper on the side that I have that looks like watercolor paper. Now this paper is quite thin. Once I apply water on it, I can feel the paper starting to buckle, and I can feel the paper soaking in the water. So there is probably no sizing on this. Notice how many layers of water I have applied on it. So if the paper is very dry or doesn't have any sizing on it, it will keep on absorbing the water. Now this is wet. I'm pretty sure this is not watercolor paper. See how the color is staying at one place. See how the color doesn't diffuse. And also take a look at how much the paper has buckled. And on the back, you can see the water has soaked through the paper. So this is definitely not suitable for watercolor use. This is the last of the Strathmore papers that I have. Now when you are applying water on the surface, make sure that the water goes across the whole surface. Sometimes there can be improper sizing on the paper, and when you apply water on it, the sizing for some reason would force the water away. And when you paint on it, that area of improper sizing, that's going to affect the paint. This looks fine. So let me just tilt this and put it to the side. This is the same paper as earlier. So this time around, I'm going to paint a flat wash and charge in some other color. So once again with ultramarine. And next we have Fabriano paper. It's usually safer to go with the more well-known brands like Fabriano, Arches, Lana Aquarelle. And now we are going to paint with a flat wash and charging some colors. Now this paper is not that thick, so it's also starting to buckle. But at least when I turn the paper on the back, I can see that the water doesn't soak through, so that's a good thing. As you are painting, sometimes you can know straight away whether or not that is a good paper. When you lay down the first stroke, you can see the color starting to diffuse out slightly on the wet surface. That's a sign that it's a good paper. But when you're painting on a wet surface and the colors they do not diffuse or they do not spread out softly, that may be a sign that the paper is not suitable for watercolor use. These have all dried nicely. Let's take a closer look. So this is definitely not watercolor paper, so I'm going to remove that. Now let's take a look at this too. With good watercolor paper, when it comes to using wet on wet techniques, the colors would diffuse softly, and that looks like the case here. Now with this area, it looks like there is some streaking marks, so this is something to take note of. When I flip over, I can see that the water did not soak through, so this is great. If you are using pen and ink with watercolor, sometimes the pen and ink may work well. The ink would not soak through, but after you apply watercolor, sometimes the ink would soak through or bleed through. So that's something that you can test as well. Here's another set. The streaking mark is more obvious here. It seems like it's still able to diffuse the color quite nicely, but the paper texture is different from the earlier paper. This paper on the right side obviously has more texture, has more granulation compared to that on the left side. If I see results like this, I may actually do more testing because when it comes to wet on wet, the edges are soft, but they are not as soft compared to this. So I would need to test this further. Let's take a look at the next set. So here you can see that the diffuse color is not as soft compared to this. So the colors, they don't spread out as much. So the colors, they don't spread out as much. The edges, they are still soft, but the colors, they don't move as much compared to this. I guess you can still use this with watercolor, but you need to know its limitations. Let's take a look at the Fabriano. So with Fabriano, we can see the colors fade into the white of the paper rather softly. This is very nice, and when I charge in the extra color, it seems to be able to diffuse quite nicely as well, just like this. This is just me painting some color swatches, testing the paper. It's still best to draw and paint on a larger piece of paper to get a real feel of how that paper will perform for you, because you would have different expectations, different preferences, and different style of painting compared to me. So you should find a paper that works best for you. So that's all I have to say about testing watercolor paper. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know if you have experienced any nasty surprises when you are using any particular paper. I would love to hear from you and your experience. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.